Hello relatives, this is Mackenzie and today we're doing Zentangle live with the HIR Wellness Institute. Alright, so I'm going to switch my camera around here. We've got a wonderful visitor. This is my cat Mookie. And those are my roommate's Mario balls. They're basically just little moss balls. But I guess they're going to be joining us today. Alright, so I'm going to start by taking my giant piece of paper here and I'm going to split it in half. So I'm just going to fold it in half. Folding it in half, folding it in half again, the other side. Oops. I guess he really wants to join us today. And then I'm just splitting the paper like so. Alright. So to start with here, I'm going to draw a flower today. So I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to draw a circle in the middle of my paper, roughly the size of a quarter. And that's really going to depend on what size of paper you have. But mine's going to be roughly the size of a quarter. Now from here, I'm going to draw some petals. So I'm not going to make these petals super straight like a daisy or anything like that. They're kind of just going to be wiggly. And the first petal I'm going to draw kind of looks like a triangle, right? If I were to make this into a triangle, but it's got a rounded bottom that connects back to the flower center. I'm going to do another one at the other side here. Not really concerned about having a straight line. I'm actually purposely going in there and putting in some squiggly lines. And now I'm going to do the opposite ones over here. And now I'm going to do in between these. So this will bring me up to 8 petals so far. Now from here, I'm going to draw one more set, and I believe that brings me up to 16 petals in total. Alright, so this is going to be my basic flower. And now from here, I'm going to take a black marker. Oh, we got a sad face. Why did we get a sad face? Alright, well, in the middle here, what I'm going to do, instead of outlining this middle circle, I'm going to draw dots. So this itself can be considered a Zentangle pattern, and the pattern I would be using at this point is I'm drawing dots, right? And they are overlapping, and they don't have to necessarily be complete. So if you're actually drawing small circles, you don't have to necessarily complete them, but I am basically making mine filled in by doing this. And I do have, I think this is a 0.5 marker, maybe a little bit bigger than that. So my dots are relatively big on the micro dot scale. I'm just going around filling this area here. You can always use a bigger marker if you don't like taking the time to do all these dots, but I really like the effect that it has when they're all filled in, because to me they look a lot more like seeds. And so as I'm doing this, I'm trying to be mindful, and I always try and pay attention to what I'm physically doing when I'm doing Zentangle. So I've got my music playing in the background for my hearing. I've got an incense burning for the scent of smell. I'm trying to relax my body, so I'm moving from my feet up my legs, and I'm just taking stock of everything, relaxing if I feel that I'm tense, going up through my back and doing the same thing into my shoulders, up to my head, and then down to my arms. Just making sure that I'm taking a moment to make sure I'm not overly tense or stressed or anything, so that I can continue doing this exercise with happiness. Alright, so that is going to be my center portion. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to outline my petals. So as I said earlier, these are really rough looking petals, but I'm pretty happy with them. And got big squiggles on them. And I'm just going through, and if I want a more squiggly line, I'm just modifying that pencil line that I did earlier, but mostly I'm just tracing the pencil line from earlier that I drew. Oh, I got my cat up here again. Alright, so that is going to be my base flower. And at this point, I'm going to take my pencil and just go through and erase any of those pencil lines I have remaining. Alright, so there's that piece. And now I'm going to take a red marker and I'm going to Zentangle the petals themselves. So for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the top of my petal, and I'm going to, kind of follow that outside line here. And I'm just going to basically make lines going from the top of the petal down the outside of the petal to the center. And then from there, I'm going to continue to make some squiggly lines. They don't have to follow the pattern of the petal. But I'm basically just making squiggly lines going from the top of the petal down a bit. And I think I'm just going to follow the petals in order. So I go from the top, down the sides, then from there, I'm just dragging my marker down, adding a little wiggle in there now and then to finish off that petal. Thank you. I do really like how this one is turning out. And I like it because this is one of those Zentangles that kind of utilizes empty space more. A lot of Zentangles do, but this one in particular, especially when we start filling in the backgrounds, it kind of looks more like, you know, a poster or postcard because of how much empty space it's going to end up with. Alright, so there is my base piece, my base flower. Oh, it looks even more pretty on camera, especially with like the shadows and the light. Very cool. Alright, so next I'm going to go back to my black marker here. Well, first I'm going to go to my pencil, right? And for my background, I'm going to specifically kind of go in a direction. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to draw a couple of guidelines for myself, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a pattern that goes from one edge kind of up around the flower and then back down and kind of curving out at the under edge. So I'm just going to make myself a guide wire to let myself know where it is I wanted to go with this. I'll give you a look at this when I'm done sketching it out too. Here. Like that. There we go. Alright. So, it's kind of sloppy, but it is a guide wire. So it's not actually meant to represent where my pattern is necessarily going to go, just kind of where I want it to stop when I'm finished, right? So it's going to start over here, kind of wrap around, and then finish on this side. So now I'm going to take my black pen, and I'm going to be using an old and familiar and much loved pattern of mine, the swirls. So the swirl begins by putting your pen down on the paper and making a swirl looking motion. And the goal of this one is to have an even amount of space between each of the lines as it goes around here. We're not going to overlap our swirl, so I'm not going to draw another swirl on top of it. So I'm being careful to make sure that this swirl didn't interrupt this swirl when they touch each other. And I'm just going to go through and do that same thing. So lots of swirls, and the spacing can vary as you see here, but all I'm really doing is making sure that it's roughly even as we go around. And so as I get closer to my guide wire, I'm going to consciously make sure that I try not to go over, or if I do go over, I try not to stray too far from it. I want there to be a lot of variation as I'm going around, so I want different heights over and under the guide wire. But basically, I'm going to try and contain my swirls to this kind of area. And this is definitely a great example of a Zentangle where you can really just kind of sink into it, let yourself use it to meditate, because it's a very purposeful type of line. I'm going to follow the same rules for the swirls for the flower. I'm not going to put my swirl on top of the flower. I'm just going to respect the borders there and do the swirls next to the flowers instead. And while I'm doing this, I'm relaxing, or I'm taking breaks to relax my hands, stretching it out a little bit. Sometimes this can take a lot of energy. So I'm seeing here that my swirls are kind of stacking up. So they're all, sitting on top of each other, which creates this row-like appearance. So I'm going to start breaking it up by moving to another section of my paper. And then I'm going to begin swirling again, and I'm going to move my way more down. Alright, so that is this part of the section. So my guide wires that I set out earlier are telling me I'm gonna fill in this area too. Alright, so here I've got that stacking thing going again. So I'm going to move down to the bottom of my paper, start working my way back up. Alright, so I'm reaching the end here. This is just because I had such a giant piece of paper, right? It's huge. So I guess my goal going forward with this is to kind of build towards the center so that I don't get too much stacking down here. Alright. So that right there is my whole piece. And I like how this side turned out with these variations, so I'm actually going to go in and put a couple more swirls up here, just so it looks a little less straight. Alright. Yeah, I like that a little bit better. So now it looks like the swirls are just, oops, going around and behind. Much better. Alright, so that was my first Zentangle. And for the second one, we're going to do a quicker one. I like this piece. I do still have to erase these guidelines in the background, but I've only got my little pencil eraser here. So I don't know if I'll be able to get them all. Alright, I think that's it. And all that really does is kind of clean up the appearance a little bit. So you don't necessarily see it straight off the bat, but it'll look nicer in the long run. Alright, so I'm going to set that one aside over here. I'm going to grab another piece of paper. So this one's pretty big. This one's pretty big. So I'm going to adjust my camera a little bit so you guys can see a little bit more of the table. Oops. Rope. This is kind of a swivel mount, so depending on the angle we put these legs at. Okay. So this is my piece of paper, and I'm going to start off with a ruler. And I'm going to kind of divide my paper, and I'm not going to measure anything, I'm just using this as a straight edge. So you can also use another piece of paper or anything else you have on hand as a straight edge. And I'm going to divide my paper in half, hot dog style, landscape style. And I'm definitely not measuring, so I don't know if this is exactly halfway between two sections there. Oh, it's definitely not. And then from there, I'm just going to roughly divide my paper up by 3, right? So, again, not measuring, just taking a good guess here. And just by how large this paper is, this design will go by pretty quickly. So, oops. So that's what my paper is going to look like. I didn't measure anything. This is just how, I divided it. And now from here, I'm going to take a smaller straight edge because my ruler is really big. And I'm just going to have that off to the side if I need it. But to start with, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my pen and go from one inner corner, and I'm going to go out to the next edge. And then I'm going to repeat that process. I'm going to go from the inner corner of this new line to an outer edge, right? I'm just going to keep doing that. So from inner corner out, and each of these creates just a little triangle, as you can see, until I reach that first line again, right? And I'm just going to continue doing that. And what this is going to do is it's going to create one of the hardest patterns for me to do because I'm dyslexic, so I get this messed up all the time. But when we start stacking these together, they kind of create an optical illusion. So I'm being pretty careful as I go through. I do want these lines pretty straight if I can get them. So if you need to, use a straight edge or a ruler. I'm freehanding them and I'm pretty okay with how they're turning out. I think if I had my smaller ruler, I might have used it. But pieces of paper straight edges tend to be a bit of a hassle for me because I like using the straight edge as like the guide for my pen. You can do this on a smaller scale. You don't need a giant piece of paper to do this. You can do this on a piece of scrap paper and just use a smaller pen if you want. Alright, so when you end that off there, it should usually end with that last square and you just divide it into a triangle. And so that is the full single pattern. When we start stacking them together, that's when we get the optical illusion. So we see here that I started from this edge and moved out. So I'm going to mirror that by starting from this corner and moving out. So I technically have switched directions, right? But I'm doing that to create the mirror image. Alright, so adjusting my chair a little bit, getting a little bit more comfortable. Move an object I got over there out of the way. Alright. It's weird because this is kind of flapping up and down, so I have to hold it down to get a nice line. Maybe we'll just adjust the camera like that. See if that helps keep us in frame a little bit more. So as we get closer here, we're going to see that last square again, which is right here. So I've got my last square all set up, and I'm just going to take it from the lower corner again and out. I messed that up, but that's basically what you're going to do. Yeah, should have just left it at that last one. Alright, so here we're starting to see what's going on, right? So we've created this pattern, which is super cool. And now we're going to go to this next square, and we're going to do the same thing that we did before. So we're going to start in this lower corner and move our way out to mirror what we're seeing here. Ooh, that was a rough line. Okay, so I'm down to that last square here. I'm just going to draw that diagonal, and that finishes that one. So again, we're kind of seeing how this is building itself up. Kind of looking cool and funky, yeah? Alright, so I'm going to start in this square. And again, I'm going to mirror. So I see the triangles go in this direction. So I'm going to start here, move my way up. My lines here kept getting bigger and bigger. Alright. From here out. Yep. Alright, so this is my last box, so this comes over like that, and that's what finishes it. Yeah, they kept getting bigger and bigger. Alright. So now I'm going to move down to these sections. I'm going to start over here. Okay. Okay, so start with this box here. So I'm going to mirror that again. So I see this triangle is going this way, so I'm going to make one going the opposite. Right? Follow that around. so there's my last box. I just cross to finish it. Alright. So I love how this like just adds in, right? If you didn't know that there were boxes here, you might not guess that there had been. So now I'm going to move to my last section. And we follow from this one. So starting in this upper corner. Alright, so there's my last square. Cross it over. And that finishes my whole design. Woo! So it's huge, first of all. It creates this beautiful illusion, right? Alright. So those have been our Zentangles for the day. Thank you for joining us. And I will see you again, hopefully next Saturday at 10 a.m. Have a wonderful weekend.